Students, we want to continue on the graphs of trigonometric functions. So we are looking at this question. Draw the graph of y equals sine x plus cos x for the intervals of 0 between 0 to 360 at the intervals of 30 degrees. Use your graph to find the values of x correct to the nearest degree for which 2 sine x plus 2 cos x equals 0.5. B. Maximum and minimum values of y equals sine x plus cos x. Then C. Values of x at which they occur. Now we are told to look for the graph of y equals sine x plus cos x. Now first of all, we need to do the table. Now we are given that we need to give it an interval of 30 degrees. So that means here we are having x. So that means your x will be what? We start from 0, then you'll be having an interval of 30 degrees. 0, 30, 60, 90, 120, 150, 180, 210, 240, 270, 300, 330, 360. Then we'll be looking for the corresponding value for y. The equation we are given is y equals sine x plus cos x. So when x is equal to 0, what will be the value for y? So this is the equation y equals sine x plus cos x. So when x is equal to 0, so in place of 0, you are going to, in place of x, you substitute 0. That is sine 0 plus cos 0. Sine 0 will give you 0, plus cos 0 will give you 1. 0 plus 1 will give you 1. So you substitute it in the table. Then when x is equal to 30, when x is equal to 30, so that means y equals sine 30 plus cos 30. So the value for sine 30 is 0.5. And the value for cos 30 is what? 0.8660. So that means you're having 0.5 plus 0.8660, which will give you 1.366. So you substitute it in the table. So 1.3366 when x is equal to 30. When x is equal to 60, you substitute it in the equation also. That means y equals sine 60 plus cos 60. Sine 60 is 0.8660 plus cos 60 is 0.5. So 0.8660 plus 0.5 will give you 1.366. So you substitute in the table, 1.366. Now when x is equal to 90, substitute it in the table. You are having sine 90 plus cos 90. Sine 90 is 1 plus cos 90 is 0. 1 plus 0 will give you 1. So you substitute it in the table. Then when x is equal to 120, when x is equal to 120, so that means you'll be having sine 120 plus cos 120. Now, you realize that 120 is in the second quadrant. Now, sine in the second quadrant is positive. So that means you have what? Sine. Then the equivalent of 120 in the first quadrant is 180 minus 120, which will give us what? That will give us 60. So minus cos 180 minus 120. Cos in the second quadrant. In the second quadrant, cos is negative. Cos is negative in the second quadrant. So this minus times plus will give us minus. Then cos 180 minus 120. That is the equivalent of 120 in the second quadrant is 180 minus 120, which is 60. So that means we'll be having sine 60 minus cos 60. So sine 60 will give us 0.8660 minus cos 60 will give us 0.5. 0.8660 minus 0.5 will give us 0.366. So you substitute in the table. As you are calculating it, you will be substituting it in the table. So 0.366. Then when x is equal to 150, then sine 150 plus cos 150. 150 is still in the second quadrant, and sine in the second quadrant is positive. So since sine is positive in the second quadrant, it will still remain plus sine. So equivalent of 150 in the first quadrant is 180 minus 150, which will give us 30. Then in the second quadrant, cos is negative. So since cos is negative in the second quadrant, now that means you now have minus times plus will give us minus, then cos 150 in the equivalence of 150 in the first quadrant is 180 minus 150, which is also 30. So that means we are having sin 30 minus cos 30. Sin 30 is 0.5 minus cos 30 will give us 0.866. 0.5 minus 0.866 is minus 0.366. Now when x is equal to 180, so you substitute it in the equation, you have y equals sin 180 plus cos 180. So that means we are still in the second quadrant. So sine is still positive in the second quadrant. Equivalent of 180 in the second quadrant is 180 minus 180, which will give us 0. Then in the second quadrant, cos is negative. So minus times plus will give us this minus. So that means we have cos 180 minus 180 is also 0. So sin 0 will give us 0, cos 0 is 1. 0 minus 1 will give us minus 1. Then when x is equal to 210, substitute in the equation, you have sin 210 plus cos 210. 210 is now in the third quadrant. In the third quadrant, you realize that sine is what? Negative. So you are having minus sine. Then you look for the equivalence of 210 in the first quadrant, which will give you 210 minus 180, which is 30. Then in the third quadrant also, you realize our cos is negative. So that means you'll be having minus times plus will give us minus. Then the equivalence of 210 in the third quadrant is 210 minus 180, which will give us what? 30. So that means we'll be having minus sin 30 minus cos 30. Minus sin 30 will give us 0.5, minus cos 30 is what? Minus 0.866. Minus 0.5 minus 0.866 will give us minus 1.366. Now, when x is 240, so y equals sin 240 plus 2 cos 240. And we are seeing in the third quadrant, sine is negative in the third quadrant. So that means you have minus sine. Equivalence of 240 in the third quadrant is 240 minus 180, which will give us 240 minus 180 is 60. So then cos is also negative in the third quadrant. So we have a minus and this plus will give us minus. Then cos. Then equivalence of 240 in the first quadrant is 240 minus 180, which is also giving us cos 60. So you have minus sin 60 minus cos 60. So minus sin 60 is minus 0.8660, minus cos 60 is minus 0.5. Minus 0.8660 minus 0.5 gives minus 1.366. When x is equal to 270, so y equals sin 270 plus cos 270. So we are seeing the third quadrant. So that means sine is still negative in the third quadrant. So you have minus sine. Equivalent of 270 in the third quadrant is 270 minus 180. So in the third quadrant, the cos is still negative. So minus times this plus will give us minus. Equivalence of 270 in the third quadrant is 270 minus 180. So that means we'll be having minus 90 minus cos 90. So minus 9 minus sine 90 gives minus 1, minus cos 90 is what? 0. So 0 is a neutral number. So minus 1 plus 0 will give us what? Minus 1. When x is equal to 300, so you're having sine 300 plus cos 300. So now we are now in the fourth quadrant. Now sine is negative in the fourth quadrant, so that means we'll be having minus sine. Equivalence of 300 in the fourth quadrant is 360 minus 300. 360 minus 300 will give us what? 60. Then we are having cos in the cosine in the fourth quadrant is positive. So since that's positive, we are having what? The equivalence of 300 in the first quadrant is 360 minus 300, which is also what? Cos 60. So that means we'll be having minus sine 60 plus cos 60. So sine 60 is 0.866, then plus cos 60 is 0.5. So you'll be having minus 0.866 plus 0.5, which will give you minus 0.366. So when x is equal to 330, so you're having sine 330 plus cos 330. So in the fourth quadrant, sine is negative, so you'll be having sine. Then the equivalence of 330 in the fourth quadrant is 360 minus 330, which will give us 30. Then cosine in the fourth quadrant is positive, so equivalence of 330 in the fourth quadrant is 360 minus 330, that's 30. So you're having minus sine 30 plus cos 30. So you're having minus sine 30 is what? 0.5. Cos 30 is 0.866. So you have minus 0.5 plus 0.866, which will give us 0.366. So when x is equal to 360, so you substitute again, you have y equals 360 plus cos 360. So in the fourth quadrant, sine is still negative. You have sine. Equivalence of 360 in the fourth quadrant is 360 minus 360, which is 0, plus cosine is positive in the fourth quadrant. So you have equivalence of 360 there is also 360 minus 360, which is likewise 0. You have minus sine 0 plus cos 0. Sine 0 is 0, then plus cos 0 is 1. 0 plus 1 will give us 1. As you are solving, make sure you substitute into the table. So this is the table you will use to now draw your graph. So for my graph, on the x-axis here, so each 1 centimeter represents 30 degrees. So that means you have 1 centimeter, you have 30, 60, 90, 120, 150, 180, 210, 240, 270, 300, 330, 360. Then on the y-axis, I'm having 2 centimeters to represent 0.5 units. So the first 2 centimeters is 0.5, 1.0, 1.5. Likewise, in the negative axis, we have minus 0.5, minus 1.0, minus 1.5. Now, if you look at my table, you have when x is 0, y is 1. When x is 0, y is 1. So that means it will be here. So when x is 0, y is 1. When x is 30, y is 1.6366. Because you cannot easily get 1.366 on your graph, so you do it to 1 decimal place, which will give us 1.4. So you are going to look for 1.4 on your graph. So here I'm having if 0.5 is 2 centimeters is equal to 0.5. So that means 2 of the lines will be 0.1. So if this is 1, this is the next 2 lines will give us 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4. So you have 1.4 here, then you have 30. So you trace it So this is that point 1.4. When x is 60, you have what? 1.366. Do it to one decimal place. Likewise, when x is 60, you have 1.4 likewise. When x is 90, then we having y is 1. So we have y to be 1. When x is 120, y is we having 0.366. So to one decimal place also, it will be 0.4. So this is 0.4 on the y-axis, then we having 120. So then when x is 150, you having y to be minus 0.366. So that means there also you are going to plot minus 0.4. So you trace minus 0.4 on the y-axis, then 150. So their point of intersection, you plot it. When x is 180, y is minus 1. So that means when x is 180, y is minus 1. Their point of intersection, you plot it. When x is 210, y is minus 1.366. So you plot 1 minus 1.4. So when x is 240, y is also minus 1.36, so you plot minus 1.4. When x is 270, y is minus 1. Then when x is 300, y is minus 0.366, so that means you plot minus 0.4. When x is 330, y is plus 0.36, you plot on y-axis, you are going to plot 0.4. Then when x is 360, y is what? 0. So you try to follow plot your graph. You are going to have something like this. Now after plotting the graph, the A part of the question says values of x correct to the nearest degree for which 2 sin x plus 2 cos x equals 0. Values of x to the nearest degree for which 2 sin x plus 2 cos x is equal to 0.5. So that means, first of all, we are having 2 sin x plus 2 cos x equals 0.5. What you try to do is you try to get this particular equation you are given in the question, y equals sin x plus 2 cos x. So if you are given this, you realize that 2 is common to having 2 sin x plus 2 cos x. 2 is common to both. You factorize it, bring it out. So that means 2 sin x divided by 2 will give us sin x, plus 2 cos x divided by 2 will give us what? Cos x. Everything inside the bracket is equal to 0.5. So you divide both sides by 2 so that you only have sin x plus cos x this side. Then 0.5 divided by 2 will give us 0.25. So you know sin x plus cos x represents your y. So that means you put y there is equal to 0.5. What this means is that when x is 0.25, then what will be the value for y? When y is 0.25, what will be the value for x? So to look for the value for x, you plot go to 0.25 on your y-axis. Then you rule an horizontal line across the graph you have drawn. Like this, you rule the horizontal line. Then wherever this line you have ruled, now cut the graph. You will now trace it to the x-axis. So at this point, it cut the graph here. You trace it to the x-axis. At this point, it cut the graph here. You trace it to the x-axis. Then you are now going to read this point. Now, on my x-axis, I use 1 centimeter to represent 30 units. So it means one of the line is 6 degrees. So now here, I'm having 120, after 120, so the line is here after the first line. So 6 plus 120 is what? 126. So that means the first value for x here is what? X is equal to 126 degrees. Then for the second value, then that is here. So that is after this 300, I have like four lines before you have this. So that means 6 times 4 is 24. Add it to this 300, you have 324. So that means the value of x at that point is what? 324. Then the B part of the question says maximum and minimum values of y equals sin x plus cos x. So you realize the maximum value is the value at the top here. So you read it to the y-axis. So the maximum value here is what? 1.5. So you having y maximum to be 1.5. The minimum value is a value down here. So you realize it touches 1.5 minus 1.5 down here. So that means the minimum value y minimum is equal to minus 1.5. Then the third part says values of x at which they occur. That means values of x at which we are having the maximum and the minimum value. So value of x, look at this. If you have the maximum value at this point, then you trace it to the x-axis. Then you read the value that is here. So when you read it, you realize that this it's going to fall at the middle here. So that would be we said each of the lines is 6 degrees. So 6 plus 6 is 12. Then the middle you having 3, making 15. 15 plus this 30 will give us 45 degrees. So when x is 1.5, y will be what? So when y is 1.5, x will be 45 degrees. Then the other value, when y is minus 1.5. So when y is minus 1.5, you are going to realize it touches it here. Again, you trace it to the x-axis. So the value you are having here. So here also you realize that will give us 15. 15 plus 10, 210 here will give us 225 degrees. So that is the values of x when you are having the maximum and the minimum value. For the work practice, then for the work practice, you are having A. Construct a table for y equals cos x minus 3 sin x for values of x from 0 to 180 at intervals of 20 degrees. So that intervals of 20 degrees means you're having 0, 20, 40, 60 like that. Then you'll be looking for the corresponding value for y. Then B, using a scale of 2 cm to 20 degrees on the x-axis and 2 cm to 1 unit on the y-axis, draw the graph of y equals cos x minus sin x. Then C, use your graph to find the value of x correct to the nearest degree for which 3 times x equals 1 and 2 plus cos x equals 3 sin x. Please make sure you like, subscribe and comment on this video. Thank you.